Week 5 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few tight ends I looked at off the wire this week. The first guy, Jake Ferguson of the Dallas Cowboys. So Jake Ferguson, this is the last week, I believe, for owners to go out there and get him. Only available in 47% of fantasy leagues. He's one of the best tight ends in fantasy football. Week 2 versus the Jets, he had a good game. 3 catches, 11 yards, a touchdown. Week 3 at Arizona, 5 catches, 48 yards. And Week 4 versus the Pats, 7 catches, 77 yards. So the last few games here for Ferguson, he's got 20 targets in the time. So he's a tight end that's obviously getting a lot of playing time. And we know over the last few seasons, Jason Witten and Dalton Schultz have been big targets of Dak Prescott. So right now, pretty much him and CeeDee Lamb, the top 2 targets over the last few weeks on this Dallas Cowboy team. And I know Week 5 is a tough matchup at the San Francisco 49ers. But right here, tight end's been a tough position. Dallas Goedert not doing much this season. Kyle Pitts, he's been a disappointment. David Njoku, besides this week, well, he didn't do much. So right now, if you need a tight end and a guy who's going out there and putting up numbers, available only in 47% of fantasy leagues, I'd give him an ad this week. Here's Ferguson. Next tight end is Cole Kmet of the Chicago Bears. And had a breakout ball game here in Week 4 in a tough losing effort after being up 21 points was this Bear team to the Denver Broncos. So Cole Kmet, the first 2 games of the year, solid games. Week 1 versus Green Bay, 5 catches, 55 yards. Week 2 with Tampa, 4 catches, 38 yards. Then Week 3 at Kansas City, only 2 catches, 22 yards. And then the big game here versus Denver, 7 catches, 85 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So Cole Kmet, we know he's a red zone threat. Him and Justin Fields had good rapport towards the end of last season. And this Bear team, they can find the spark any way they can. They need one right now. So while Kmet played well in this game and available as well in 47% of fantasy leagues, he's the tight end that's going to be added most, like Ferguson as well. Coming off the wire this week, the next tight end is Dalton Schultz of the Houston Texans. So Schultz, coming into the season, he was a top 12 tight end, obviously drafted by fantasy owners after having good seasons with the Dallas Cowboys the last few years and getting a good money contract by the Houston Texans. But now he hasn't done much this season, but Week 4 finally had a good ball game. 3 catches, 42 yards, and a touchdown. So Schultz had 8 or less fantasy points the first 3 weeks of the season. But C.J. Stroud's got this offense in order. They're playing good football as this Houston Texan team. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, got Dalton Schultz there, Robert Woods. So a lot of weapons, and Dalton Schultz, I think, could be a threat. Houston Texan team, and work the middle of the field. So like I said, I'm not going to trust him 100%. But after coming off a solid ball game with 13.20 fantasy points in PPR weeks, he's a tight end I would add this week. And right now, he's available in a lot of leagues in 64%, where owners dropped him over the last few weeks. The next tight end's Andrew Ogletree of the Indianapolis Colts. I know Ogletree hasn't done much this season, and this Colt team pretty much runs with 3 tight ends. Mo Alley-Cox, who found the end zone in this one. Colin Granson, who's on the field a decent amount of time. And now you got Ogletree, who found the end zone. 3 catches, 48 yards with a touchdown, so his best game of his career. So Week 5, pretty decent matchup versus the Tennessee Titans coming up into Indianapolis. Obviously, Indianapolis indoor stadium, always good for any player for that fact, obviously. But right now, Andrew Ogletree, after coming off a game, and there's just not much on the waiver wire. He's definitely a guy I would recommend. I'm not saying he's the first priority. These are the players I mentioned early in the video I would put over him. So right now, if you're in a deeper league or you have an open bench spot in some league here, need a tight end, I think Ogletree's a decent stash this week to see what he does. In the final tight end I looked at off the wire this week here is Cade Otton of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Cade Otton and this Tampa Bay Buck team, I know they're going on bye here in Week 5. And then after that, pretty good matchups Week 6 versus Detroit. That gives up the most fantasy points to tight ends. In Week 7, another good matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons, 4th most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. So Cade Otton, he had 2 ball games at 10 or more fantasy points this season. Week 2 versus Chicago, 6 catches, 41 yards. Week 3 versus Philly, only a catch, 16 yards. And then Week 4 at the Saints, 3 catches, 13 yards, and a touchdown. So he's a big target. Last season, we saw Otton had a kind of a breakout towards the end of the season with Tom Brady, obviously, in this Tampa Bay Buck team. But right now, going on by, not many people are going to go out there and get him. But just like Ogletree, he could be a tight end to stash on your roster this week. Here's Cade Otton, and he's available in 98% of fantasy leagues. That's a few tight ends I looked at off the wire here for Week 5 of the fantasy football season.